So now we're going to talk about Chapter 7 in the PMBOK Guide, Project Cost Management. Before I get started, let me mention that if you're interested, we have lots of free PMP prep materials at projectprep.org. We've got cheat sheets, full-length practice tests, note cards, lots of stuff that should be pretty helpful. So there's 4 processes in this chapter. There's 3 in planning, 1 in monitoring and controlling. So we have planned cost management, where we're documenting how to manage and control our costs. We're probably going to include our estimating method in there. Then we're actually going to estimate our costs, approximate the finances needed to complete project activities. We're approximating the cost of those activities. And the next, determine budget, is where we're aggregating those costs of activities together and generating the cost baseline, the approved version of our costs, our budget, and then we're going to use that as a comparison to actuals later. We want to compare the baseline to the actuals. And then we're going to control our costs, monitoring project costs and managing change to the cost baseline. That's in monitoring and controlling. Okay, now let's talk about estimating costs. So there's 4 really key techniques for estimating them. The first is analogous estimating, using historical data from a similar activity or a project. So we're looking at the past and saying, we've done something similar, or we've seen something done, in a similar fashion, and we think it would cost this much. I think of the word analogy, or making an analogy or a comparison to a different project. And there's parametric estimating, using an algorithm to calculate cost or duration based on historical data. It's similar to analogous, but you're using algorithms, math, stats to come up with a number. And the way that I remember this is that it has parametric in the name. So metric, I think mathematical, or an algorithm. And there's 3-point estimating, averaging optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely estimates. And finally, bottom-up estimating, that's aggregating estimates of lower-level components of the WBS. We're starting at the low level from the bottom and adding them up. Now, in the estimate cost process, there's 2 key outputs. Activity cost estimates, that's just the cost to complete project activities. That could include labor, materials, equipment, services, IT, and so on. So we have the estimates themselves, and then we have a basis of estimates. It's basically just data or details supporting the estimate that we came up with. We talk about what method we use, any assumptions that were made, and a range of possible estimates perhaps. So we should have our cost estimates and a basis for how we got to that estimate. Okay, and here's an example of an estimate that we might come up with. Maybe we're developing a social web application. We may need to look at the cost of storing the data in a database, the cost of a web server, and the cost to develop applications for desktops and mobile devices. Those could be all potential parts of a cost estimate that we come up with for a social web application. Okay, now let's move from estimating costs, so approximating the cost of activities, to determining the budget, where we're aggregating all those costs together and coming up with our cost baseline. Now the cost baseline is the key output here, and really what it is, it's the approved version of the budget minus any reserve, management reserve. And we use this cost baseline to compare to our actuals later. So if you recall, a management reserve is it's contingency, it's backup if something goes wrong, because unexpected things always happen on projects. And so it's good to have a little bit of contingency. But what we want to use as a basis for comparison to our actuals is our cost baseline, the aggregation or the adding up of all of our activity costs. So that's one of the outputs of determined budget. Another is going to be project funding requirements. This is the forecasted project cost to be paid. Are we going to get the funding for our project all at once in total? Or are we going to get them in periodic, or do we have periodic requirements for those? For example, do you need $1 million this month and $2 million next month? If so, you need to plan for that in your funding requirements. Now let's talk about earned value management. Now, just to kind of get this conversation started, I want to just remind you a couple of things about project costs, and this could go for other constraints in our project. But we have a baseline, which is our planned budget. Those are our planned costs. And then we have actuals, our actual costs. Now, if you look at this chart on the right, it's showing you how we're spending on a particular project cost over time. And so it looks like, because the red line is our planned cost, and the green line is our cost to date, it looks like, maybe we're actually doing pretty well. Under budget, we have a little bit of room, and so if something does go wrong, we've got some management reserve or contingency. It looks like we're underspending, which in some cases is perfectly fine. Now, but what this is neglecting, though, is scope, because we want to think about the triple constraint: cost, schedule, and scope. So even though we may be underspending based on our plans, the question is, did we get less scope accomplished by the time that we originally planned here? So maybe we're spending less, but we only got half of the scope accomplished that we had intended by this time in the project. So we want to think about cost, schedule, and scope all at the same time. And so earned value management can help us with that. So basically we're combining triple constraint measurements to assess project performance and project. So we're kind of looking at the cost baseline, the schedule baseline, and the scope baseline all really at the same time in an integrated way, into an integrated baseline. And we're asking the question, have we completed the planned scope within the budgeted costs and time? So we're looking at all three of those constraints at the same time. So for each work package in our WBS, earned value management monitors three key dimensions: planned value, earned value, and actual costs. So planned value is the authorized budget assigned to an activity, and that doesn't include management reserve, because if you remember, we're using our cost baseline that excludes management reserve to compare to our actuals. So it's our authorized budget for an activity. And the total planned, like if you add all the planned value up for each activity on the project, you're going to have your budget and completion, your BAC. And so planned value, total planned value, is really our budgeted completion, what we budgeted to spend by the end of the project. Then there's earned value. The question is, of what we had originally planned, how much have we earned? What have we earned? What have we accomplished? And the EV is often used to calculate the percent complete on a project. So really we're looking at what we've done. That's the percent complete. How much have we earned? What work have we actually done? I think when we look at an example in a second, I think that will make more sense. Then there's actual cost. This is what we actually spent to get the work done that we're measuring in EVM. And so the actual cost will have no upper limit. Whatever is spent to achieve the EV will be measured. In an ideal world, all of these are aligned. Planned value equals earned value equals actual cost, but that's really rarely the case. And so we're looking at all three of these at the same time. And we already mentioned this, but planned value is going to equal our budgeted completion, our total planned value, our planned value for all the activities. That's what we have budgeted to spend at the completion of the project. A couple other measurements to look at in EVM is estimate to completion and estimate at completion. So estimate to completion is looking at how much additional money do we expect we will spend. And estimate at completion, it looks like, or is telling us how much do we think we're going to spend in total once the project is done. Things that are already complete, that we've already spent, and what we have estimated still to spend. So estimate at completion equals actual cost plus estimate to completion. So it's what we've already spent plus what we expect we'll spend from now until the end of the project. That's our estimate at completion. Okay, let me give you an example here of a video gaming system, maybe Nintendo Switch. So let's say that, and this is a simplified example, but we're looking at getting the project done in 5 months. And each month we're planning to accomplish the work that's mentioned here. So in month 1, we want to collect customer feedback. In month 2, design the system. In month 3, prototype it, and so on. And then in the bottom row, you're going to see our budget, what we've planned to spend, our planned value, for each month and each piece of work. Now imagine this. If after month 3, see it's at the end of month 3, so you assumed or you hoped that we would have gotten collecting customer feedback, designing the system, and prototyping the system done. This is what we'd planned to have accomplished. But what if you've only got the first 2 things done? You've only collected customer feedback and designed the system, and you spent $6 million to do that. So you had, 3 pieces of work planned, but you only got 2 of them done, and you spent quite a bit of it to get it accomplished. There's a problem here. So you're behind schedule and over budget. So take a look at this. So you've only earned collecting customer feedback and designing the system, because that's all you got accomplished. So you only earned that budget. And so you add 500,000 to 3 million. That's going to give you 3.5 million. That's what you've earned. We budgeted that much for those 2 activities. So that's what you've earned. You've only got those 2 things done. But the problem is you've spent 6 million to get them accomplished. So 6 million is going to be your actual cost. Your earned value is going to be 3.5 million. And then your planned value is going to be well above that. You're going to add 500,000 plus 3 million plus 5 million, because you expected at the end of month 3, you're going to have those 3 things accomplished. So what this tells me is that we're behind schedule and over budget based on our EVM calculations. So earned value equals 3.5 million, and actual cost equals 6 million. So we've earned a lot less than we've spent. Bad measurement. We've overspent here.